At the end of the 16th century, after more than 200 years of existence, the core of the Janissaries changed considerably. These changes are extremely important. We need to keep them in mind in order to understand what followed in the 200 years after that. Therefore, we should dedicate a short episode to look at the part the Janissaries played in the Ottoman Empire around 1600. Under the pressure of foreign enemies, stalling expansion and crippling inflation, the Ottoman Empire was forced to turn the Janissaries into part-time soldiers. Otherwise, they would not have been able to make a living. At the turn of the 16th century, the Janissaries had spread to nearly all professions. Some became petty shopkeepers, other boatmen, or ran coffee houses. But traditionally, a Janissary had to learn a trade during his training in order to enable them to provide services on campaign and give them a secure income when they retired. Now the education and training came in handy, when they also became artisans and penetrated the guilds. A recent study suggests that the integration of Janissary artisans into the guilds was already completed by the 17th century. Janissary involvement in the economic life of Istanbul not only took place at the level of small-time jobs, but also at the level of guilds and lucrative trades. This gave them a lot of power. An important part of the activities of the Janissaries in the market was their presence in the guilds. It was also through Janissaries that some guilds made their presence felt as a political force in the region. As a matter of fact, the guilds were able to create a political pressure in this way, even preventing campaigns. This means the Janissaries were powerful enough to stop the government from recalling them to their original task, that is, military service. In addition, the government sent the Janissaries into the provinces to fight the bandits roaming the countryside after the civil war between Selim and Bayezid, who struggled over the succession to Suleiman. This furthered the welfare of both the enlisted men as well as officers. Whatever bandits and Sipahis had taken before them now went into the Janissaries' pockets. This was the perspective of the enlisted men and NCOs. For the officers, it became even better. The former rivals, the provincial cavalry, became useless from a military point of view, and army men took over the fiefs as farmer generals, as Barkan calls them, who ran the land as tax farms. In the end, this means they paid for the right to exploit a certain area instead of the government for a certain time. Influential Janissaries had a good chance of obtaining such a tax farm. The Janissary Corps began to put its tentacles everywhere, just like an octopus. The imperial army increasingly became an immense corporation, whose purpose was the exploitation of the country through the administrative and fiscal organization of the state. This was all the more easy because of the judicial immunity of the military, and their being unaffected by corporate and state regulations. When I read about this topic, I suddenly had a realization which is hardly talked about in the literature. We can reproduce my thought process by looking at the status of the Janissaries around 1600. The Janissaries developed from elite soldiers into tradesmen serving only when needed. The days when they earned a living through plunders from conquests were over. Instead, they now did honest work as petty shopkeepers, unskilled laborers, but also high-skilled artisans who became influential with the guilds. For this income, they had tax exemptions because of the status as Janissaries. Additionally, they also received a small payment for being soldiers, rations, pensions, and on certain occasions gifts from the Sultan. We spent an entire episode on all the goodies and benefits they received. I encourage you to watch it. Higher ranking Janissaries were another case. They had the chance to become farmer generals. The task was to provide easy money and credit to the government, while extracting everything they could from the farms in the time they had bought the rights to the area. So, on the one hand, we have the enlisted men. They provided the manpower for warfare and received welfare in return. A welfare-warfare state, so to say. On the other hand, there were the officers. Just like the Sipahis before them, they managed military and agricultural affairs for the government. A military-agricultural complex, if you will. Anievas and Nisan Kioglu reference a work by Burak Tansel. According to these two authors, Tansel talks about the military-agricultural complex in regards to the Sipahis. but when I looked up the source I found this phrase nowhere. Nonetheless, this description fits perfectly, also for the Janissary officers who became tax farmers. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is my big conclusion. We have a welfare-warfare state of the ordinary soldiers as well as a military-agricultural complex of the better positioned elites. This can be described as the Ottoman Deep State and in its middle set the Janissaries. They recognized the chances history provided to them and used the influence to secure for them whichever benefits they wanted. That Selim II allowed them to send their sons to the core locked the system in. The way the Janissaries came into this position is revealing. First, they lost their efficiency. As we have seen, their costs rose while they were not up to the task of expansion anymore. At least it became too burdensome in contrast to alternatives. Aggression was the service they could provide. The only question was at which target to direct it. So they began to direct it inwards. Second, when the empire roamed with bandits, some of them former comrades or newly accepted Janissaries, it was their task to deal with them. In return, they collected fees for transgression. In the end, the Janissaries were hardly distinguishable from bandits. Be it Janissaries, Sipahis or highwaymen, their basic business model was to take from people violently. It is interesting that Barkan described the Janissaries as unaffected by corporate and state regulations. This is no surprise. Of course they were unaffected by the regulations of the state. They were one of the most central institutions of the state, since as army and police force they provided the monopoly of violence. Who could face and stop them? We shall find out soon enough. And now it is your turn again. Do you think the Janissaries' welfare-warfare state, as well as the military-agricultural complex, fits the definition of a deep state? Go on, contradict me in the comments. Please do not forget to like, share and subscribe. So long, we'll meet again soon. Stay critical, stay curious, stay free.